Good morning, everyone. Good morning. The Planning Committee joined me in welcoming you to our first class of the 5th year of the bucket courses. We're delighted to have you here this morning. I'm Joanne Bundy. I chair the Community Education Council, which sponsors the bucket courses. You'll notice the bright orange sheets of paper on your tables, and those are the announcements. If you happen to be a first-timer for the bucket courses, please read those, and that will give you all the information you need to have. And even if you're not a first-timer, please read the first sentence, which says, "Please silence your cell phone." So if you'll do that, we'll be on our way. You will notice that we are trying something new with the bucket courses, and that is to have one speaker for one class for 6 weeks. And the reason we did that is because you have been so good at recommending speakers to us. And we have everybody who has had an opportunity to teach you has offered to come back again. So if we took 4, 5, or 6 weeks for each of those speakers, we would all have kicked the bucket before we get replaced. So we are very fortunate today to have Tilly Woodward as our lecturer. I've been passing around the article from the newspaper that was out about her and the work that she has done, and we are really most fortunate to have her. She has recently received the award for the 2013 Outstanding Museum Educator Award, which was presented to her by the Art Educators of Iowa. And I want to say congratulations, Tilly. Well deserved. And we are lucky that this famous person is here to teach us today. And she will give you an example of why she has received this award when you see about her work that she has done with children in teaching art to children in Ghana. So please welcome heartily Tilly Woodward, who is the artist and the curator at the Faulconer Gallery at the Grinnell College. Tilly Woodward.
Hear me? You can hear me okay. I'll try not to laugh, and I'll try not to blast you. Keep it at a good level pace. So thank you very much for having me today. It is a real pleasure to be here, and I'm really. I woke up this morning and I was really excited about the idea of being able to spend some time thinking about and talking about my experience in Ghana just a little bit over a year ago. That thing about anniversaries when a year was passed, it's a really good time to stop and reflect again, I think. I don't know if that's true for you, but that's true for me. So I'm going to start with the backstory on my journey, because what happened, the way that I got to Ghana and the way that I was supported in being able to work with these children who were rescued from child slavery, there's the journey to the journey. And that journey starts with Grinnell College's Prize for Social Justice that was started a couple of years back. And as they were initiating this prize that is awarded to people who have done extraordinary things in the field of social justice who are under the age of 40. It's the Young Innovators for Social Justice Prize. And I was asked to make a painting that would tell the story of the first prize winners. And never having met them before, but getting their nomination packages and reading their stories, and then trying to come up with some idea for a painting that would represent their life and their work. And so I was given this packet that told the story of Challenging Heights and of James Colby Annan, who is a remarkable person who was himself a child slave. He was sold into the fishing industry in Ghana, and most of the children who were in child slavery there, that's where they end up. They end up in the fishing industry. And so this is a picture of the painting that I created for James Kofi Annan to tell his story. And so when he was about 11 years old, he decided that he really had to leave. He could not tolerate being a slave anymore, and working these boats and working these nets. And so the fish talks about his experience having to pull these fish, in particular tilapia. And I will tell you, trying to find a whole tilapia to work from in Iowa, you can find tilapia fillets, but that was a real search for me. I finally did find a whole tilapia that I could use as the subject for the painting. So the fish is representing his time in the fishing industry as a slave. And when he escaped, and the nets are really, I don't know how well they show up for you, but they are really representative of the bondage of slavery that he went through. So when he escapes, he goes back to a town near where he had grown up, and he came to the conclusion that education was the thing that was going to change his life. And he didn't know how to read, and he didn't know how to write. And his strategy was to stand outside schools every day and wait for the kindergarten students and the first grade students to be released from class. And he would come up to them and say, "What did you learn today?" And he had these kindergarten students and these first grade students be his teacher. And in that way, he learned how to read. And if that is not a remarkable story in and of itself, it is nothing compared to what he went on to do. And he was so driven by this idea that education was the thing that would really change his country, change his life personally, but also change the lives of the other children who were in this bondage of slavery and working in the fishing industry. So he kept on with the idea of education, and he ended up with a master's degree in education, or a master's degree in business rather. And he took this master's degree in business, and he became the manager of Barclays Bank in Ghana, which is a remarkable accomplishment. I think of people that I know here who, in the United States, and what we take for granted in terms of our education or the opportunities that we have, or the sense of social responsibility. Because it was not enough for James Kofi Annan to take care of himself and set himself up. Because at this point, as a manager of Barclays Bank in Ghana, he's set. He's in a really good shape. But this driving force that he had inside of himself to make it better for other children who he knew would continue to be in that same condition that he was in, really motivated him. So he had this idea that he wanted to start a school for kids who were former slaves. That education, again, was that thing that was going to change the world. So the coins are representing his time in the bank, and the alphabet is representing his drive to learn to read from the kindergartners. So he opens up this school, Challenging Heights, and he finds funding for the school. There is no free education in Ghana. Kids, you pay. You have to pay to be able to go to school. So he's working to find all these different ways to fund the school. But the idea that it's a school, it's just not enough for James. And so he becomes actively involved in rescuing children who are involved in slavery, which is a really risky thing. It's risky for him, it's risky for the kids, but it's an important part of the program that he does. And he worked together with the Humpty Foundation, which is a foundation that worldwide provides shelters for particularly children who are in particular critical needs, so in refugee areas, And they worked with James to create this shelter that's located out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally out in the middle of nowhere. And in part it's there because it provides a safe place for the kids. They have had slavers come to try and get their kids back. So the idea that it's isolated is an important thing. And it also, they provide safe haven for these kids and counseling for these kids, and begin the process of figuring out where they are in terms of educational needs and starting them in school. So the tape measure you see in the background is one of the things that is taught, because there's definitely a focus on academics, but there's also a focus on real skills that will help these students be able to support themselves and support their families. And tailoring is a big thing in Ghana. You don't go down to Walmart to buy a pair of jeans, or you don't go down to Tyson's to get a jacket. You go down the street to a little shop, and the shop might be, I don't know, just the size of this platform here, and there's a person there who will measure you and has a sewing machine, and the next day you come back and you have some clothing that's made just for you. So this, the tape measure is about that activity. But still, even having set up this shelter and rescuing students, rescuing these children from slavery, that was not enough for James either. And he went on to be really active within the government of Ghana and changing legislation and establishing children's rights. So he's working at all these different levels. And I think that's one of the things that I found so moving about his story, was that it wasn't just, I'm going to start a school, and a school is an incredible thing in terms of being able to change the world, but he's going to look at it in this much, much bigger way. And then the other part of it, which I still have a really hard time fitting my head around altogether, is he really believes in changing communities and changing families. And ultimately the goal, when the kids are rescued and after they've had time at Hubdy House for recovery, is to reintegrate them with their families and send them back. And to me that seemed like a really hard thing to put my head around. Why would you send kids back to families who had sold them into slavery? But one takeaway that I had from the whole experience is that, what makes sense for us here in terms of how we would think of or judge things, the choices that we would make, there are different choices there. And a lot of times it was not because a parent didn't love their children, their child. It was because they did love their child and they had 5 of them and they couldn't afford to feed all of them. And what are they going to do? Or there was some tragic event that happened in their life, and there was some huge expense, and there was no way to repay that expense, and the family was at risk. So what are you going to do? And so the kind of choices that these families were faced with were not the same choices that our families are faced with here. So that was a big takeaway for me. But it wasn't enough for James, and this is definitely the reframe in the story. It was not enough for James just to say, well, we need to reunite people with their families, because he knew that was not going to work. So he started developing these microfinancing projects and working with communities to educate them against child slavery, but also to provide them with economic opportunities so that there were other choices, so the kids did not have to be sold. So before I got to Ghana, one of the things that I was thinking about was I knew that I wanted to make art with the kids. It seemed to me really, really important that kids have an opportunity to express themselves. And I've had some experience working with kids who have suffered trauma, and I have known that and seen that opportunity to express things visually can be really helpful, because sometimes there just aren't words to express what you may have been through. I also knew that it was not going to be a situation where I could necessarily just go and pick up any art supplies that I needed, so I needed to plan carefully on what I was going to take. So I got to the airport and I had a backpack on that was just kind of stuffed, and I had the largest rolling suitcases with 4 rolling wheels that I could get, so I could have a backpack on each side and a suitcase in each hand and going, because I was traveling by myself. And I got to the airport and they looked at me and they looked at the bags and they weighed the bags and they said, no. And I said, I understand, they're overweight, I'm happy to pay, because that's another part of the story, is that Grinnell College provided a really fantastic fellowship for me to be able to do this project and to travel. So most of the funds went for, for the travel ticket itself to get there, but a lot of the funds went to buying the art supplies and then paying the overage on the bags, because they were really heavy. I think it was $200 a bag to get the things there. So I get on the plane and it's a nice flight and I make all my connections and I arrive in Ghana, and immediately I have this feeling that I am in a place where obviously there is a system, because people are doing the things that they need to get done and they know where they're going, but it is not a system that I understand at all. And just making it through customs, it's like, wow, okay, here I am. And I go through the baggage carousel and my bags are gone. They did not arrive. And so at this point, I'm just really wondering what it is that I'm going to do. And on my Kindle, I have a book that's like a guidebook about Ghana, Ghana culture. So I look on my Kindle, and there is a telephone number for the hotel that I will be staying in for 2 nights in Winneba, which is about an hour and a half away. And it is the only information I have really about where I'm going to be. So, and my cell phone isn't going to work in the country. So I give them this number and I think, oh my goodness, I'm here for 3 weeks. What am I going to do? And I make this journey to the hotel, which in and of itself was a pretty interesting journey. And in the middle of the night, they get a call and my bags have arrived. So then I get to have another adventure, and I will say it is a bit of an adventure driving in Ghana. Taxis are everywhere. Knowing, it's good to know somebody who knows somebody, so that you get a good taxi that has all its parts to it, because sometimes they don't. And then also helps you with negotiating in terms of price. Because one thing that I think traveling will reveal about you is some things that you are good at and some things that you are bad at. I am not a bargainer. I am a really bad bargainer. If somebody says, well, it'll be 80 CDs, I will say, okay. So it was really good to have somebody coaching me along the way. That was really helpful. So I go back, I get to the airport, and I go to I asked the driver to come with me in, because for one thing, the other thing I found out that I was not really good at is my hearing is not great anyway, and hearing language or hearing even English being spoken with a different cadence was really difficult for me. And then also, like, from where the parking lot was to where the lost and found was not the same kind of access here, so I was going to be going down steps and crossing a road that was not paved, and so this guy kind of looked at me like, you're asking a lot, but he did it. He came with me, which was really, really lovely, and we get to the lost and the found, and the lost and found is a room about this big, and there are shelves all the way around that are chocked full with all these suitcases, and there is a mountain of suitcases in the middle, just kind of like tossed up there. And I walk up and I look and I see my suitcases. They are there. So they get pulled off the mountain, and then I have to go through customs, and they open up the bag, And in the art supplies that I brought along these bags of carrageenan, which is this white powder. And I've also brought these bags of paper mache paste, which are also these white powders. And so I had a really tense conversation with the customs lady, and she wasn't understanding me very well, and I was doing my very best to try and explain, but finally it worked out. So then there I am in Ghana, and I have my stuff. The first couple of days I spent in Winneba, and there's a ringing there, and it just, I don't know. It was really a remarkable experience for me. I mean, the way signs were, the way people conducted their lives, the poverty was incredible. But at the same time, the dignity and the kindness and the way that people would spend time with you was really remarkable and wonderful too. The importance of God and church in the community was really overwhelming. And everywhere, like all business signs, you know, it was like faith was a huge part of that. Everywhere, taxis, you'd see all these signs that would remind you to be happy and pray and that God was looking after you. This picture shows like there are open sewers. Some of the sewers are more open than others. And Winneba comparatively is a fairly big town. This is where the Challenging Heights School is located. There are, I'm guessing, about 10,000 people in this town. And when I was there for 2 nights before I went to the shelter, and I don't know, it just, I'm kind of speechless about it. But so to walk from the hotel to the school was kind of a circuitous route. And growing up in the Midwest, I'm used to a grid. If I'm on a grid, I can find my way. If there's some curves, I'm going to get lost. So I used my camera to take breadcrumbs so that I would know how to get back. It was a pretty good strategy for me, except that that Ghanaians, and I had read this and had been warned that I needed to be pretty discreet with my camera because documenting the poverty was something that many Ghanaians were really not comfortable with. And they're incredibly proud of their country. And the sense of patriotism there, as compared to the sense of patriotism here in the United States, was something that I really was really remarkable to me. You know, there was a passionate sense of caring about the country. So I did get yelled at really vigorously when I was taking this picture, and I was like, oh shoot, I need to be a little bit more discreet. But in general, I found it to be a really warm and welcoming country, and a lot of times I didn't know necessarily what was going on all that well, but people were really kind about helping me out as it went. One thing that I said earlier was that, you know, obviously there was a system there, but I didn't necessarily recognize the system all the time. For instance, this is a store. At first I didn't recognize these as a store, but this is a store. And this was this family's livelihood, and they sold different things at different times. I loved the signs that were painted everywhere. And in part, you know, maybe it has to do with people not being able to read necessarily, but also I thought they were just really great artists. So again, this is just some shots. These are my breadcrumbs from the hotel to the school. And it kind of gives a feeling for just the community in general. This is a really big store.
Supermarket.
Yeah, this one looks like a supermarket. And this is driving in the taxi. This one's kind of hard to see. This is on the way from Winneba out to the shelter where I stayed for about 3 weeks. And it's a cornfield. Doesn't look anything like Iowa cornfields. And you know, the way that it's tucked in to the vegetation, this is it's kind of washed out. It's kind of hard to see, but oops. But this right here is the corn. Yeah, just tucked in. And these are yams, and I ate a lot of yams. Yams are really tasty, and they are really giant. Goats were everywhere, and chickens were everywhere. They were just they owned the town. And interestingly, at the end of the day, they all seemed to know where to go. And the day started, and they all seemed to know where they go, but they all ended up back where they were going. This was a casket store on the way from Winneba to Accra, which is the capital where the airport
I'm
is.
to see if the store is an example of what you can get, or do they
It might be.
sell it? How do you buy it?
This might be the only one, and you might buy that, and then they might have something else in their store.
Was someone there to take your money?
There were some people nearby. This was just on the outskirts of Accra, so this was a really, really huge building. This again is this is the marketplace. There's like this huge marketplace corner on the outskirts of Accra, and it just people have things on their head. The traffic is like bumper to bumper. It's maybe 4 lanes on each side. People are walking up the lanes. There's a person that can be selling everything. There was one person that I saw that was the person, if you needed a remote. This person on their head and on their body and in their arms had every single kind of remote you could ever want. It was amazing. So big things. In terms of transportation, there were taxis, there were buses, there were a lot of people on motorcycles, but there was also this public transportation system called Trotros. And Trotros were minivans, and sometimes they would be stuffed full of products, like this one is just like stuffed, jam-packed full of products. Sometimes they are jam-packed full of people. There are Trotros who have sort of regular routes, and there are Trotros, they're really opportunistic travel, and they are super cheap. Like you might pay 25 cents to go 30 miles. So that, but also they are not necessarily regular in their routes. And you want to look at the Trotro that you're getting into pretty carefully, because some of them are safer in terms of their mechanical stability than others. Yeah. So more of the marketplace. And this is the school challenging heights. There are big gates, and the gates are open. Yeah?
I'm surprised by all the English.
Oh, you're surprised by all the English. English is the national language of Ghana. However, there are several different dialects that are spoken as well that are, so English is the business language and the government language. And for a lot of people, it's used. But for instance, with the students that I worked with at the shelter, most of them spoke Cree, and they spoke only some English, and some spoke none. And some spoke English really, really well. So it varies. So here are the gates of the school, and the gates are open, and at 8:15, the gates are locked. And if you didn't get to school on time, you are out of luck. And kids are devastated if they miss their chance to get in. Yeah. So these are their gates. And this is inside the school. And I have to say, when I first walked in, I was pretty overwhelmed, because A, there are 600 kids at this school. And B, like what we would consider standards for schools in terms of what you need. A lot of the classrooms were open air. You can see in the background, like the construction, these are wood slats that are, that are not meeting together to form an enclosure. But given the heat, maybe that's okay. They did have one building that had a couple of air-conditioned rooms in it. Electricity, though, is variable. They have internet, but that can be variable with electricity because it kind of comes and goes. Kids wear uniforms. Kids were wildly friendly. This is a shot of their. They have a new computer lab, a technology lab, because I will say that in some regards, in terms of access to internet and cell phone use and wireless, Ghana, I think, is like far ahead of us because they don't have the infrastructure for telephone lines, but the idea that things could be wireless and done with internet and with cell phones, they're ahead of us on that, I would say. So this was a huge addition to the school. All the computers are covered up with these cloth these covers because it's an incredibly dusty place. And even in the classroom that's closed off and has the air conditioning, it's still pretty dusty. Kids were really interested to talk to you. They would come up to you and the cadence of the English is different, and the way English is used is a little bit different there too. So kids would come up and they would immediately want to know, what is your name? How old are you? Have you given birth? And at first, it's like, that's not usually a question I get asked. But then it's like, no, they're asking if I got kids. That's what they want to know. And so, they're being really friendly with me. So this is another shot of inside the school, and there are a number of volunteers who are arriving. The place was really, really busy with volunteers from all over the world. They are constructing another classroom in the back on the left-hand side there, and that is really typical of the construction that you would see in Ghana. There are a lot of handmade bricks. It's handmade concrete, handmade bricks, and then those bricks are constructed. And oftentimes one floor is completed and then another floor is built on top. And when I arrived, there was a group who had just spent like 2 or 3 weeks leveling the yard so that it was a more level playing field. And if I had not known that they leveled it all with wheelbarrows and shovels. And, to me, with, this idea of, standards that we would expect in terms of like construction and street leveling and land moving here in the U.S., I might have thought, but then I realized that no, actually this was a huge improvement for them and an incredible amount of labor. So I spent a couple of days in Winneba, getting my bags, getting oriented, going through some introduction to to Challenging Heights and their mission, their goals, and then I end up at their Hubdy House shelter, which is, like I said, out in the middle of nowhere. When you're there, there's electricity only from 6 o'clock at night until 9 o'clock at night, and then the generator goes off. During the day, there's no electricity. There is running, there's a spigot. There's a spigot for the whole compound. And they do have toilets and they do have sinks and there are showers, but there's no running water to that, so everything is done by bucket. So that's how it goes. And to me, that seemed like a really kind of, well, once you're doing it, you're just doing it. It's just kind of, that's the way life is. But to these kids, it was like the best place ever. It was like a resort to them. There were 3 good meals a day. They were big meals. And they had beds. They slept indoors. They had clothes. It was amazing. So one of the first things that I did with the students is I didn't know them and I didn't know what levels they were at. So I had a journal that was a cooperative journal that we started passing around. And it was a good way for me to get to know the kids and to see, if they were drawers, what level of drawing they were at, if they were able to write, what they might be interested in. And so this is a picture of one of the students who's working in the journal. And everybody wanted to work in that journal. It was, people would line up for a term. They literally would line up for a term. And they would hang out with each other and they would encourage each other for whatever task they were doing, whether it was drawing a picture or writing out their multiplication tables. Because I have to tell you, these kids were more serious about their education and the value of that education and the privilege of having an education than any other kids I have ever worked with. And so, the idea that you would, be wanting to sit down and to write out your ABCs over and over and over in a book and watch somebody else do that, it was incredibly meaningful for them. One thing that I did find was that at first kids were hesitant to draw, and in some regards I think maybe they had never had that experience before or have been encouraged to draw. And if you know at all about art education, there are very definite levels of development. There are benchmarks that you would expect, for instance, for toddlers to do, or for kids from kindergarten through 4th grade to do. And in general, kids were below level of what I would expect for their age. But even within the 3 weeks that I was there, because they were engaged in the drawing, the difference that I saw in their drawing was just pretty remarkable. And it looks like we're getting ready for, we need to take our break. We need to take our break. Okay, so we're going to stop there, and then I'm going to talk a lot about art and bookmaking from here on out.
Back to Tilly Woodward and teaching art to children in Uganda. Tilly.
Is that working? It's working. Okay. So like I said, I started in with these kids with this journal so that it gave me a way to give them, build some relationship with them and get an idea of where they were at in terms of their drawing levels, and also where they were at in terms of math and reading, because one of the things I also encouraged them to do, and they did naturally on their own, was to write in the journals as well as draw. So, and they also spent a lot of time writing out their math facts. That was a big deal to them too. I did not have any organized classes while I was there, because one of the things that was important to me was to fit into the life of the shelter and not be an imposition on them. And when I arrived, really the director and the house mothers and the teachers didn't have a clear idea of what it was that art was going to have to offer them. And, I was an outsider, so, my idea was I was going to fit in as best I could. So I was assigned 5 kids who were ages 4 through, I'm going to guess 7 or 8, who were not really doing too well sitting in class at school. And they said, you could be this preschool teacher for these guys in the class. And I have to say, it is hard for me to imagine. It was really, I wondered, here is Mayu, this little boy who is 4 years old, who has been sold into slavery and rescued. What was it that he did? It was just really hard for me to imagine.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
The kids that went to school had uniforms on. Now these kids haven't. Do they?
Correct. You said the kids who went to school, the kids in Challenging Heights and the school in Winneba had uniforms on, but these kids who are here at the shelter do not have uniforms on. At the shelter, I don't know, they had, their big sacks of clothes would arrive in a taxi every once in a while. And everybody would say, "It's Santa Claus Day." And then we would go, people would go through and find what fit. So, no, they don't have uniforms here. So, and yeah, sometimes there's a shoe that fits a particular child. One of the last things that I did when I was there was help. I tore up a part of my towel and helped sew together this sandal for Charles Obadiah. It fit him, but the sandal back was broken, so we fixed the sandal together. That was one of the last things. Soccer was really, really huge. There's this big open courtyard. It's kind of, the shelter is set up like a two-story U, and there's a big courtyard in the center. And when classes were not in session or meals were not in session, it was really or when I was not making art actively with people, it was common for there to be a game going on. And they did have a couple of balls that would be inflated, but most of the balls were water package wrappers, because you couldn't drink the water there, or I couldn't drink the water. Kids drank the water out of the spigots, but I'm not going to drink the water out of the spigots because it's not, it's not safe to drink. But most of them are most of the balls were water packages that were stuffed inside each other. And maybe there was like some thread or rope. Oftentimes that came from pulling a string out of your shirt, so that you had, So like again, the level of what you need to have to get along is a whole different thing than what we have here. Here are a couple of other pages from the journals. And I have to say, it was interesting to see how themes develop over time in the journals. There would be days that there was a lot of writing, and some of the writing would be practice that I knew was going on in the classrooms, and we would encourage that practice going on. There was one habit that we had a lot was I would have kids draw the picture, and then we would write out the word, so that they were connecting the image to the letters in the words. It was a really good practice for them. This is the view out the back of the shelter. Behind the shelter there was this playing field, and there's like a volleyball court. There's a net that was put together by one of the students. He had learned to make nets by hand when he was a slave, and he was really happy to be making nets, but to be making them for these volleyball courts. And in the back there's this huge tree, and it's kind of hard to tell, but this is the garden where they grow a lot of the food for the shelter. Again, this is a cornfield right here. This is, I don't know, there were all different kinds of plants that were tucked in there. And they had some goats too. One thing that kids drew a lot over and over again was boats. They knew a lot about boats. Kids draw what they know. And especially at that age from, before you hit middle school, kids draw what they know and not what things look like. So, and they knew a lot about boats. And at first, I saw a lot of these long boats, but then later we saw a lot of different kind of boats that evolved. So I started with this journal project, and then once I kind of got established with the kids, the next thing I did was I wanted to teach them to make their own books so that they had their own journals that they could be drawing in and writing in, so that they had a place of their very own, that regardless of whether it was a picture or whether it was homework, it was theirs. And it also taught them a skill, which was important to me. I decided that we would use marbling for the cover of the books because I wanted to give kids the opportunity to have the joy of color. And marbling is really magic. You have a dish that has that carrageenan, that white moss product that got me into so much trouble with customs. You take that and you shake that up with water, and it makes the water be thick, and then you can take paint and tap it on top of the water. And it makes beautiful designs, and you can't do it wrong. And the color is going in all different directions and flowing. It's a really beautiful process. And in fact, can I do this? I'm going to escape from here and go to this one right here, which will explain our bookmaking process. And this is a PowerPoint that I put together for Challenge. They asked me to put this together when I was leaving because, like I said, when I got there, they weren't sure exactly what good art was going to do them. But when I left, they were like, we really need you to be able to put this together for us so that we can continue to do this. And so this was our bookmaking process that we did with the kids. So we started by making covers for the book using this marbling technique. And one reason that I also picked bookmaking and the form of bookmaking that I did was because it really takes very few tools. And if you have paper, and paper was accessible, you could do this. And here's this bag of carrageenan, and you need about 1 tablespoon will do. And there were all these liter water bottles around. And if I was doing this here, I would put the carrageenan in a blender and blend it really, really well because it tends to be clumpy when you add the water to it. But there was no blender there, and there was not going to be electricity during the day. So we used a water bottle, and we looked around the compound and found rocks, and put rocks in the water bottle, and put the lid on it, real tight. And then we shook it. And you know, when I first started this process, and I'm making the carrageenan with kids lined up for a turn to shake the bottle, and everybody shook the bottle. And we got, you know, and it took a long time to get it to be mixed well, but we did it. And we did it often because we discovered that we really liked marbling. It was really good. So the other thing that you need is you need some acrylic paints and some little sticks. I was really concerned too because the things that they have, they care about a lot, and so I was worried about the tables because I don't know, you're going to get paint on your tables. That's at one point. So I said, you know, I really would like to have something to cover the table. I said, well, we'll get some brown paper. We have some brown paper. It's like, man, I could use for a drop cloth, but or a sheet of plastic. But so here the kids are, and they are flicking the paint onto the surface of the carrageenan, and it really does. It's great. It's like magic. And then you take your piece of paper and plop it down onto the surface where all that paint is. And then when you pick it up, the paint has stuck to the paper. And then you need a bucket of water, and you take it and you bathe the paper in the bucket of water. You give it a dip so that the carrageenan, which is all slimy and gooey, sheds off, but the paint stays on the paper. And then we would take these and in that big courtyard area, when kids were not playing soccer, we would lay them out in the sun to dry. And we would put names on them, although that was tricky because kids would go by a couple of different names because the day that you're born on, you're given a name for that day. So for instance, Kofi is for Friday, and I'm forgetting okay, Kwame is for Saturday. Yeah, so there are those names, but then they also had other names, and then they had names that maybe their slaver had given them, that some of them went by. So the names business was confusing, but we made it work. So the next thing you do is you've got your marbled paper, and you're going to want to make your book cover. And the only thing really you need other than the paper is a straight edge stick, which will have multiple purposes. So I taught kids how to rip the paper. And so here's like step-by-step ripping the paper. So you've got the marbled paper, and then you've got an inside cover paper that you have to size. And you could do this with measuring, but you can also do it by sight. So we did a lot of by sighting. Eyeballing is good. Actually, eyeballing is really good because it makes you be a little bit more precise in your seeing and making some judgments about shapes. Measuring's good too. So there we go, we've got it sized. And that's what that should look like. And then you take, I brought, I don't know how many glue sticks, boxes of glue sticks with me, so that there would be enough. But I did find out that these are also available. However, you can also use Elmer's glue that's diluted with paintbrushes, and I brought them Elmer's glue, and I brought them paintbrushes, so that they could get that done. And so the next thing that you're going to do is cover your cover page with glue, flip that over, adhere it to the marbled paper, and then you do the clipping of the corners. And then you're going to glue the edges, and then you're going to fold those edges down. And then you're going to get the paper that you are going to put inside the book. And you know, it was my preference to have blank pages so that you could do drawing on them without lines, but they had a real preference for lined paper. Like after I'd made 50 books with, you know, the kids, and I needed to go and get some more paper. They said, "Can you get lined paper this next time?" I was like, "Okay." You know, if it's what you need, then that's okay with me. So we got lined paper for this next one. Using clips to keep the paper in place while you're getting ready to size it, figuring and so we would cite the straight edge on the corners there so that we were in relationship to the cover. And then teaching kids how to tear paper takes a little bit of strength and a little bit of precision, but you get good at it after a while. I got really good at it. And then here we are, we're folding it, we're folding the cover. We're using clothespins to hold it together. We're using a hammer and a nail. So far you need paper, the carradine, and the paint, hammer, a nail, some clothespins. Clothespins are around because people wash their clothes in buckets. Thread is around because there are all those sewing shops that are around. So then you thread up your needle and you sew through all those holes that you pounded with your hammer. And you sew through the back, through the front, and back through the other side. And then you sew back around so that you have stitching on both sides. And you tie it, yeah, here we are coming back through that hole. So you have to sew through the same holes, which could be confusing. But the one thing I have to say is these kids were really, really quick, most of them, on picking up visual processes and being able to figure out how that was going to go. And so then you tie it off, and voila, then you have a book. And then the next step, which is the important step, is to fill it with drawings and the stories and homework, and that it was a place for them to express the things that were most important to them. So that was our process. I'll exit out of that one, and go back to that other one. Can I do that? I can do that. Here, that's right. Is that same one? Yeah, it is. Okay, and now how do I make that get big again? Here we go. Oh, we go right here. Woohoo! I did it. Okay, so here we are. We were working on marbling. Like I said, I had the five kids who were like not sitting in school. In school, there was half a day. For the most part, because you know it's really hard to all of a sudden be in school or to all of a sudden have to concentrate, especially when you're still, you know, having to deal with everything that you've been through. This is Avenue. Am I going the right direction? There were about five girls. Most of the students at the shelter were guys, but there were 5 girls. And the girls especially had, I think, probably the most horrific experience as slavers in slavery. And it was explained to me by James that when the boys got to be like middle school, you know, that your hormones are kicking in. And so what are and you're big enough at that point in time that you could run away or you could act out in a variety of different ways. And one of the strategies that the slavers used to keep guys there and working for them was to supply them with young women. And so for the young girls, it was particularly a horrific form of slavery. So here are the tools that we needed for making books. And, I like the idea that these simple things have the potential for education, for expression, for healing. Oops, there we go. And here we are working again. So I had the 5 kids that were my kids, and we would hang out together in the morning. We would do a variety of different kind of art making things. We would look at books, we would sew together, we would draw together, we would use scissors and glue together, we worked on books together. But then the recess bell would ring, and all of a sudden, all 43 children from the classrooms would rush out to the open pavilion where I was and want to do exactly whatever it was that the kids had been doing during that day. So crowd control was an issue that I really struggled with, and I just learned to surrender to the situation. And we got better at figuring out how to take turns because there are a limited amount of things. And I tried a variety of different strategies, and some of them worked better than others, and I did my best to forgive myself on a day where it seemed like somebody had gotten overlooked, and just kind of kept going with it. But it was, on the other hand, really exciting to see these kids be so delighted to have the opportunity to paint and to do printmaking and to do cyanotypes and to do sewing projects. And to make their books. I would meet with them in the afternoon in, quote, small groups. I was supposed to get a list of names and, get maybe 5 to 10 kids at a time to work with on the bookmaking, but it was never like that. It was the figuring. There were always other kids coming along. So these are. This is Madam Linda, who is the director, and the kids. This is a difference in the way that language works there. In Ghana, I was Madam Tilly, although sometimes I was also just Madam, and sometimes I was Madam Abroni, which means Madam White Woman or White Person, and sometimes I was Madam Tuna, because somehow or other Tilly and Tuna it's just the way it used to fish. So this is Madam Anita, who is the director of the shelter, and then this is Madam Joyce, Madam Linda, Madam Joyce, and Madam Anita. And Madam Joyce and Madam Anita were the 2 house mothers. And this was another thing that was amazing to me. There were these 43 kids that lived there. They lived there round the clock. And the amount of staff that they had was there was Madam Linda and the 2 house mothers. There was always one guard that was on duty who was someone who sat by the gate. And it was good because there were people who had on occasion come to get their slaves back. But also it provided employment for people. And then there were two women who came in and cooked. And there were also 3 teachers who came in for half a day each day. And that was it. I mean, that was it. And it ran incredibly smooth. So once I had managed to make books with all the kids, and that it took me a week to establish the journals and do all the marbling and everybody had made one book. And I felt like, wow. And then I got approached by Madam Linda, and she said, we want everybody to make more books. Everybody needs to make another book. And you need to teach us how to do it so that we can keep on doing this. Because Madam Linda had the idea that the books could be something that the kids would want, but also if they made a second one, it could be sold. And the sales from the books could help fund their education, which in fact became something that we did. So here's some kids with their books. And with other things. Being kids. And here are more boats.
That was an angry son.
Yeah. Well, there's some sun, yeah, and some sun with a lot of teeth too. Yeah. Yeah. And here's a view looking down. It's a quiet moment. There on the far left side is the spigot. So that's where all the water buckets get filled up. But the books were really important to the kids, you know, and they really valued them. And I didn't really have an idea of how much they valued them until Madam Joyce was telling me that she had come across a kid who had 2 books, and this was before we had been making second books. And she wanted to know why this kid had 2 books, and one of them didn't have his name in it, and he had traded his bread from dinner for another book, which, I mean, to me that was, it was hard to take. So as the kids kept drawing, other things began to come out over time about things that they knew about, and they knew about helicopters.
Yeah.
And they knew also about, it wasn't all small ships or small boats. They knew a lot about some really big boats too, and that was a pretty interesting thing. Here we are, we're writing in journals. A couple of the kids, there were 3 kids that were refugees that had somehow ended up at the shelter. They were refugees from Liberia, and they don't know what happened to their parents. And I'm not sure exactly how they became part of the shelter, but they were the only family unit that was there. There were 3 brothers. They had had a lot more education than a lot of the other students. The other thing another practice that I do when I'm working with kids, especially kids who are not able to read and write on their own, is I get them to tell me the story of their drawing, and I always try and write down the information of what it is that they're telling, in part because it gives kids the idea that their drawings matter and that they're important, and I'm paying attention, I care about what it is that they're doing, and that sense of caring, I think, encourages people to continue with the process of self-expression and engaging in drawing, but also it models reading and writing, and it gets them to connect ideas to images. And that is a really important part. You know, you don't think about art being all that important in terms of education, but actually it can be a really great way of reinforcing reading skills, establishing reading skills, helping to engage kids in higher order thinking, thinking about symbols. So that was a practice that I did. These slides are kind of sporadic. And I hope, so I'm not telling a straightforward story, I hope that's okay. But that was kind of my experience there too, that each day and each moment there would be new things that came up. There were no toys at the shelter. There were like the 3 balls that were inflatable. But other than that, there were no toys at the shelter. But kids found things to do. And so one day, there was this flip-flop that had blown out, and there were 3 broom straws, and there was a piece of plastic that had been dug out of the trash, and there was some string that had been pulled from a shirt bottom, and voila, you have a sailboat. And the sailboat was passed from person to person to person. In fact, I think probably one of the most incredible moments for me while I was at the shelter was there were not very many bugs. While I was there. I didn't see very many bugs, but one day this boy captured this flying bug that was the most beautiful flying bug. It had the most beautiful, intense, iridescent green back on it. It was gorgeous. And he had one of those strings that had been pulled from a shirt, and he tied the string around that bug, and that bug was passed from boy to boy to boy all day. And it was the most marvelous entertainment and toy. And it was so carefully, it was cared for. It was a treasure. It was pretty lovely. So, more goals. Now, one thing that I did notice when I first started working with the students is when they would draw things, they might draw multiple things on a page. But the idea that an object would be placed in relationship to landscape or organized in a composition was not something that happened when I first was there. And over the course of my 3 weeks there, things that would be that I would consider normal to see in kids in maybe 4th, 5th grade, 3rd grade began to happen. Baselines began to appear. The idea that a boat is in the water began to appear. So that was exciting to watch. And then, as I said, they revealed things that they knew, and it wasn't just all those small wooden boats. It was some really, really big boats that have, what are those, is it like radar on top? I don't know that much about boats, so I can't tell you what it is, but they were really huge boats that they knew about. Kobana and Abana, Marta, yeah. And then there was the day when the engines started appearing. And at first I didn't really know what they were. And then I realized, oh, those are engines. Those are engines from boats. And actually they would be really specific engines on boats. So again, this idea that drawing is a way of revealing what you know or processing what you know was pretty fascinating to me. And it's not just once or twice that these appeared, but they appeared over and over and over again. I think I probably saw 100 engines. This is my room. They had a volunteer room, and I was the only volunteer that was staying there during that time. Other people would come in and go from time to time, but I was the only person involved. So I just spread out. I had a place to hang my towel and a place to sleep. And these are my 3 buckets of water. In general, it took me 3 buckets of water a day for bathing and flushing, because you could bathe and then you could use your bath water. If you were careful about rinsing, then you could use that again when you were flushing. And or the bucket that I'm washing my apron in, I should have brought more aprons with me. I never took it off. Because when I would leave, I would walk out my door in the morning and I would immediately be surrounded by kids. And the proximity, that was something that was just really pretty lovely. Sometimes overwhelming, but there were always kids tucked in around, petting your hair, sitting in your lap, hanging over your back. So it was a real close contact kind of situation. So when I would walk out of my door, I needed to have my apron on, and in my apron I needed to have scissors, thread, a pair of a needle, some nails, a glue stick, because kids began taking every spare piece of paper, and they would come up and they would say, Madam me, Madam book, me. And we would have to stop it and we would just make a book. And these were out of all sorts of scraps of paper. So there were the official books that were fancy with the marbling, but then there were also all these books from other things, papers that were going on. This is Isaac Borgsy, looking on the journal. The upstairs, the second story had a big kind of open area, and then there were also all these rooms for sleeping upstairs. Yeah?
Were there male teachers and sponsors and supervisors? You mentioned the women.
Oh, were there male teachers and sponsors and supervisors? The teachers were all men. Yeah. But everybody, and there was, and the guards were men, but then the house moms and the director were women. So, more boats. So we're starting to get more of an organized composition going here, which is exciting for me to see. And that's one thing I have to say, a lot of times if you've not worked with children for years and years, or if you've not studied about art education, you might look at kids' drawings and have no idea what's going on, or why scribble would be significant because it has repetitive marks, or kids have made a complete circle, or where the arms and legs are coming out of a person. But for me, looking at these drawings, I get really, really excited about the amount of progress and the amount of information that's being communicated through them. There was one time when electricity happened on during the day. And that was when Ghana was in the Olympics and the soccer team was playing. Everything stopped. So this room was like the meeting place, the eating place, and the praying place. And it was a schoolroom too. Yeah. And here, this is like writing in one of the journals. This is King David. King David was one of my favorite students there. And every time I would see him, he would come up to me and he would say, "I am King David. I am happy every day." And that was one thing that really amazed me about the program is when kids come in, they receive pretty intensive psychotherapy and counseling. And then they are really encouraged and to tell their story completely and to have it recorded and to have somebody who knows and understands listen to them and help them process that. And then they are really encouraged to move on and to commit to this idea of being happy. And it's reinforced through singing, through the work they do in schools, through the attitudes that the house moms demand out of the kids. And those house moms could really demand stuff out of the kids. But it's something that I really paid attention to and thought about. I don't know, you stand yourself beside other people and sometimes you wonder if you were in similar circumstances how you would measure up to them. And definitely with King David, I don't know, I'm just really pretty moved by him. Here we are, we're looking at soccer. It's a big deal. Here we are, we're doing some drawing. One thing that would happen too, that was, when I would first get there, I was really worried about making the materials last or the supplies last. And I didn't bring enough pencil sharpeners. I should have brought more pencil sharpeners because we went through a lot of those. But we're like with the pen that lived with the journal, every once in a while it would disappear and I would be like, dang it, somebody took that pen. And I would ask, and somebody would inevitably say, oh, so-and-so has it, and then go find the pencil sharpener, and it would come back. And so I just learned to relax, and it was much better. So this is like typical of a huddle of kids who are doing whichever project I had out for that day. And just kind of like the intensity of community and interest of, even if one person is doing something, everybody is going to be involved. Here's another thing that was kind of amusing to me. So there's a visiting group that's coming through, and I'm out working with the kids, and they're all huddled, and some of them are on the table. And that day, John Emprim was laying down on one of the tables, and the house mother comes up, and she said, "We've got these visitors over here. You have to look good for them. Why are you laying down on the table? You should be sitting up." So it was okay to be on the table, but laying down was not okay. It's kind of interesting. This is Kofi Jr. He is one of my young kids and just a remarkable young person. One thing that was really hard for me is that I will never see these kids again. I have no idea what will happen to them. And that's kind of difficult. About a week after I left, they started the process of reintegration for this group of 43, and most all of them left the shelter. And I think at this point in time, Maybell, who is one of the older young women, she's in Winnipeg now, last I heard, and is going to school at Challenging Heights. They've added some places that boarders can stay. Most of the time people have to go live with a family, but they've added some rooms for boarders. So this is the dining hall, and I ate with the kids for every meal, and I have to say that was one of the most challenging things because the portions were huge. Eating was intense. I could never eat all of the food that I had, so figuring out how to divide my food among the people that were there was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And sometimes some days and some meals I could do it and it would be okay. And there were a couple of meals where I caused a riot. And I physically had my plate ripped from my hand, and other people, and it was intense. And on the other hand, if you had lived without food on a regular basis, and you were looking out for your best interest, it didn't seem like such an unreasonable thing to happen. But I also have to say that the food was great. The white bread was not my deal, because there was lots of loaves of white bread, but for the most part the meat was like whole grains that were cooked over charcoal fires. Occasionally there might be some chicken or some goat in it. Oh, it looks like we're going to be wrapping up here. So here's going to school in the morning. Everybody lines up. I loved the beginning of school every morning because kids would line up. The director would come out and sternly admonish them. The teachers would come out, they would sternly admonish them. Then singing would happen, and then everybody would march off to class, which was pretty lovely. But I just, there's a little line. We're going to go fast here. Oh, this is how water came in these little packets. You would bite off the corner of the water and then you would suck it down. The first week I was there, I didn't buy enough water. So, figuring out what it was that you needed took a while to get there. Well, those are some of the opportunistic books we made out of odds and ends. This was another toy. There were a lot of big fights over this bead and this rubber band. Yeah. Oh, here we all are. This is my last day. I'm getting ready to get in the taxi and head off. And then I walked into the hotel that I had stayed at, and that at first had seemed to me like no great shakes. And walking into that hotel room, it was quiet. And I have to say that the shelter was one of the noisiest places I have ever been. For one thing, it was concrete, so there was a lot of noise. But like even in the middle of the night, there would be this radio on with this evangelical minister really loud. And so, it was quiet. And there was running water. And the shower is cold. There's no hot water heater at this place. But the toilet flushed. It just made me think about what we have in just all different ways. And the last thing I did before I got in the taxi and headed to Accra to go back to the airport and fly back home was I went down to there's a beach at Winneba. It's maybe about a mile from the hotel, and I walked down the road and came to the beach, and it was the perfect thing after the intensity of being with those kids, which was wonderful, but also, just like from the moment I walked out the door until the moment I walked in the door and it was lights out, it was like attending to somebody's intense needs. So just to be able to see the movement of the ocean and that openness was really, really great. However, there were these boats. And I knew more about the boats from the kids' drawings than I had known before. And I had been wondering all along what Mayu, that 4-year-old, did. And you can't see it well, but this is this rickety boat that's out on the ocean. And there's this little boy that's about this big that has a white bucket that is bailing that boat for all he is worth. So it just, I wouldn't have thought another thing of it if I'd not been there. So that's kind of that. And here are some of the books. And one thing that delighted me most this summer was Grinnell sent another person on a fellowship to work with Challenging Heights. And they came back with about 100 books. Kids are still making books. And one thing just around Thanksgiving time last year, we had a book sale of the books that had been made by kids with Madam Linda wanting them to be sold. So I ended up bringing them here to Grinnell and selling them here at Grinnell. We raised, I think, $800 and some odd dollars, which translates into about 1,600 Ghana CDs, which is a lot of money there. And so for all of these books to show up, I am planning another book sale, and I would be delighted to sell each and every one of these books that I have, and there are like stacks more of them. And what we did was we sold them for a minimum of $5 each, but you could pay more if you wanted to. And I think that's how we'll do it again. And I'll get information to you all when that happens. And so I better stop because I better stop. But thank you so much.
Delightful.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful. It's been a pleasure knowing you for all these years, and it's wonderful about the things you do are just incredible, and you use your talents so well and help so many people. And Flowers on 4th and bucket courses, I want to thank you very much. This is a bucket of thanks. Thank you, Tilly.
And thank you, Nisha, too. Next week, we will be doing our second class of the variety pack, and that will be Dr. Peter Daniolos, who is Associate Professor at the University of Iowa Children's Hospital. He will be talking about the art and science of psychotherapy. So come early and get a good seat because we expect to be quite crowded. Also, Jean Libby asked me to announce that Micah is running out of food, and if you can help with that, please see Jean after the program. But we will see you all back here again next Wednesday morning. Thank you for coming today.